What we know about Agile is that it's never done. Agile is not today what it was in the early 90s when I started doing Scrum. It has changed.
ProCognita, Get Agile podcast. Fearless Change. Interview with Linda Rising. Welcome to Get Agile podcast. My name is Tomasz Wykowski, and today with me is Linda Rising. Welcome.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you. So we want to talk about change, and there's a book I read recently which is called Change or Die, and basically the bottom line of the book is when people are given the choice to change their behavior or they're gonna die soon, most of the people don't. I mean, like 90% of people can't change their behavior. So let's go into that direction, Linda.
Yeah, and of course you're talking about Kotter's book that is a classic. It's a classic book on change. And that study had to do with people who had a diagnosis of a pretty serious health issue. I think it was heart attack or stroke. And a lot of health problems we know are tied to our everyday habits. In fact, if we could make a list of just a few things that people could do, then we would not only be healthier, but we would live longer and our quality of life would go up. And these are things that we know. This is science-based, and the information has been out there for a long time. But we can look around us and we can see very clearly that even in the face of that evidence, we don't have to have a heart attack or a stroke. We know that we're not choosing healthy habits. We don't want to change. We like the food we eat. We like the way we live. We don't have time to exercise. We don't spend time with our family and friends. Of course, these days that's more difficult, but it's just a handful of things, less than a half dozen, that would make us all healthier and happier, and yet we don't do it. So it's not just somebody who's had a heart attack, not just somebody who's older, not just somebody who lives in the United States.
That's not us, by the way. Just to make it clear, that's not us about the older people.
Yes, I know. Well, I am old, and I live with a lot of older people, and I can see. I live in a community where people refuse to change. I see people who have health issues who will not do just a handful of very simple things. So this is a given. Even when faced with something pretty severe, what the world is going through right now. Someone once said several decades ago that if we faced a common enemy, we would all unite. Well, we face a common enemy now, and we are not united. In fact, the common enemy has divided us. We are more severely divided, more resistant to change our attitudes, our habits, more than ever. So the common enemy is a myth. It's not true. And we are seeing it play out right now in front of us. We are living through a giant social psychology experiment.
Yeah, so one thing I already noticed a few sentences before is you said we can look around. The thing is, basically, we can look at ourselves as well and see exactly the same behavior. And now we're getting into how we change the organization, which is like, few steps away from how do we change ourselves.
And you're right that organizations and communities are made up of individuals, and we know that if individuals are hard to change, then organizations are even harder to change, because now you have a collection of individuals. Sometimes large organizations have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals, so it's very difficult to change. So the first thing you have to realize is that what you have is something called a complex adaptive system, or the abbreviation you see in the science is CAS. And what we know, because there is a science behind complex adaptive systems, what we know is that you cannot simply by making a timeline or a plan, you cannot change that complex adaptive system on a schedule. You can't look out 6 months and say, oh, we're going to plan to all be agile by June. We know that's impossible, and yet we continue to do that. The science says clearly the only thing you can do with a complex adaptive system, this applies to organizations, this applies to communities, this applies to individuals. The only thing you can do is take a very small step. And in Agile, we call that an experiment. It's not really an experiment, it's just a little trial. All you can do is do some small thing and then run that little experiment or that trial for a short period of time and then see what happens. So that in the complex adaptive systems literature, that's called probe. And then we have sense and then respond.
So one thing I didn't mention at the beginning of this podcast is that you're also the author of Fearless Change book, which is pretty important why we have a conversation about the change in this case. But one thing I've noticed about the change is one thing is we do a lot of experiments and then we end up with having the organization fall back into the old behavior. So can we go into that direction?
Yeah. So the pattern in Fearless Change that applies is called sustained momentum. That you can't ever assume, and this is also true at the individual level, you can't assume that once something has happened, once you have seen some small change be successful, you can never assume that that will continue. I think we make a big mistake when we bring people in, especially highly paid consultants, and they work with the organization for a period of time, and then they go away. And now we think, okay, we have changed. We are agile. It's all done. And that's a big mistake because the organization continually grows and changes. And it's very easy for us to take one step forward, 2 steps backward. In fact, that's true at the individual level. You can't assume that because you have started exercising and now you have you think, a habit. And now every day you do whatever your exercise is and you think, that's done. I don't have to think about that anymore. That's not true. Because any setback, any change, any challenge that you face will move you in a given direction. It may move you forward, but it may also move you backward. And so you must continually monitor, you must continually experiment, you must continually learn. That's what the sustained momentum pattern is all about. There are no guarantees at any level. So you must continually do little experiments and little retrospectives. Say, how is it going? Am I still exercising? It's so easy to lose that habit, to move in a different direction. And that happens in organizations as well. Someone must lead that, must monitor that, not with the idea of running around with a checklist, but to continually ask, well, how are things going? Maybe we should try something new. And what we know about Agile is that it's never done. Agile is not today what it was in the early 90s when I started doing Scrum. It has changed. And that will be true in your organization. And so you must think about that. And what will the changes be? And what are you learning from what is happening now? So it's not just a button that you turn on and then you can leave it and say, the lights are on, we're done, we're Agile, the end.
So basically, the bottom line from my perspective is we need to teach management to experiment and to do this continuously, no matter if you have those coaches, the well-paid coaches from outside or not, which is kind of hard to be done anyway. So how to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a mindset that there are a lot of individuals in organizations who have been at a particular level or doing a particular activity for a long time. And once that habit is established, then they tend to believe that, well, I know how to manage, I know what organizations are about. And they, when they adopt Agile, just incorporate that in their toolbox and with a checklist say, yes, we're doing this, we are doing daily stand-ups, we are doing retrospectives, and to believe that therefore they can continue to manage in the way they always have, even if now the requirement is not about a list. It's not about a set of practices. It's about, I'm going to call it belief. It could even be a religion. It could even be the placebo effect, that it rests on your belief, on your purpose, on your values. And based on those intangibles, now the organization must make decisions about what will be Agile tomorrow. It might be different from what Agile is today. And a lot of organizations are uncomfortable with that. They want some fixed approach. That's why the pandemic has been so hard for people. Everything is upside down. No one knows what will happen. Will we return? Will we go back to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week? No one knows. Even a month or 2 months or a year out, everything is upside down. And that makes all of us a little uneasy, but especially management, executives who want to have some level of control over what goes on in their organizations, and it is gone.
But even if we talk about the senior executives, and assuming that the senior executive want to have this more experimental mindset, more of this like a small step approach, I think it's still super hard to do that. I mean, to achieve this one, if only the CEO is the only person. So how do we, I don't know, how do we achieve that? How do we teach those managers to have this small step, experimental way of working, way of thinking?
Well, I think the executives, of course, can teach managers by example. In fact, that's a requirement. If managers are really going to learn any new behavior in an organization, if they don't see it in the high levels above them, especially at the CXO, president, CEO, CIO, if they don't see that these people are really living their values, living this change. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said, be the change you want to see. That's the best way of teaching anyone. That's the best way of teaching your children any set of values. If you want your children to be honest, you must be honest. If, as an executive, you want your organization to have an agile mindset, to experiment, to be okay with learning, possibly even saying, this experiment didn't go the way we'd hoped, but we learned a lot, then those executives must themselves do that. They must exhibit those behaviors. They must be agile if they want their managers and the employees to also adopt that agile mindset. Because as soon as you look at the CEO and you say, no, he or she is not living those agile values, then you've lost them.
Okay. So what I'm hearing so far is we need, first of all, accept that there's not going to be plan change. Then we need to assume that we're going to run a lot of experiment and we are expecting to see this behavior from the top down of the organization. Still, I have a feeling that we are missing few important parts. What are these?
Well, I think maybe first of all is there must be a purpose in the organization. If the organization has no values, if the organization itself doesn't run on honesty, transparency, sincerity, the belief that what our organization is all about is worthwhile, then you have no foundation for any of that other behavior. So the assumption in Agile is when the coach comes in that we examine, well, what is this organization all about? And that must extend down all the way to every team in the organization. They must all understand that. And for many, especially many large organizations, that's something that perhaps existed in the very beginning, but now has been lost along the way. And you can't build a really, truly agile organization if there is no foundation. So that makes it especially difficult. I wonder if a lot of agile transformations fail, not because there's any flaw in the agile approach, but because there was no building block, no foundation on which to put all of those agile practices and values. And so it was always unsteady, never really ready to move forward in a nice, solid manner. That's what holds everything together in the midst of all of this. Well, let's experiment, let's learn from that, because it sits on something solid that everyone in the organization knows and buys into and believes. So that is a problem.
So before we start the change, we need to see if there is a foundation. And if there is no foundation, what we do? Just go to another company or build some foundation?
Sometimes there's this another pattern from Fearless Change. Sometimes it's a wake-up call. When the coach comes in, or maybe you bring somebody in to tell you about Agile and they begin talking about values, and we look around the organization and suddenly we realize we started this company believing in, maybe it was a dream. We all shared it. But what happened? Along the way, somehow we lost that. We'd like to go back. We'd like to recapture. We'd like to resurrect that dream. We'd like to recover the dream we had that was the founding mission for our company. It was there. And now we see we've lost it. So sometimes that wake-up call is a good first step for the organization to say, now we see that. Now we realize, let's address that first. Let's bring the whole organization together somehow, and let's see if we can return to what it was that we had maybe a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago. What was it that we had that will bring us back together? This is also a piece of marriage counseling. We know that when we were married, we were in love, we had a belief in the future. Did we lose that along the way? Can we recover that? So all organizations, as they age, they sometimes lose those founding values. This is what the United States is going through now. We have forgotten. We have a core set of values. We all believe in those, and we need to be reminded of that, because now what we're focused on are our differences and how we see the world differently. And we've forgotten the common values, the purposes that led this country to form in the first place. So that's true for all organizations.
I'm in Poland, so that could be a longer discussion probably. But no, I'm not gonna go there. That's not this kind of podcast. And anyway, one thing that comes to me when I was listening about those values, the founding values, one of the things we often see in the organization, and this kind of correlate to the name of the book as well, is the moment we start doing the change, there's a huge fear about what's going to happen. And what I'm hearing is like without those foundation, you cannot address this fear. Maybe there's something more to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes you can be in denial and think, oh, well, we know we're having struggles and problems right now, so maybe what we need is some kind of, I'm going to call it icing on the cake, just a superficial change, just some small thing, and that's like a silver bullet. That will make all this bad stuff go away. And since we don't have any science in the way we run our organizations, it's all based on stories. Well, I heard a good story that company over there, they're going agile and it made things better. So let's go agile and that will make things better for us. So we hear those buzzwords, we get on the bandwagon, and we expect miracles and that all those problems we had in the past, well, it'll all go away. And we never look at the cake, whether or not the cake has gotten moldy over time. It's not worth eating. So if you put nice new icing on the cake, it's still not going to be very good. But that's a common approach to problem solving that you see today. We don't want to address those core issues. It's so much easier if we just bring in some new, superficial, small, let's all just go agile. Let's do these 10 things, and that will make it all better. We do that in our own lives. Wouldn't it be better if we just take a pill? Then we don't have to change our habits. We don't have to exercise or watch our diet. We will just take this pill and it will lower our cholesterol and make our problems go away.
If you will find this pill, just let me know.
Yeah. Well, everybody out here in my community is taking it. It's called a statin. And instead of watching their diets, they just take a statin every day and it lowers their cholesterol. So it is magic.
So what is the spirit in Agile community? Like a daily stand-ups? It's like everybody's doing this one and, no changes?
Yeah, that's right. So we'll just start doing a daily stand-up. You see that a lot in organizations, and you say, oh, you're doing Agile now, or you are Agile right now, or you're experimenting with Agile. Oh, yes, we're doing a daily stand-up. We have retrospectives. Check, check, check. We have our list. We know the practices. A coach came in and helped us get going. We have small iterations. Yeah, we meet with the customer. Yeah, we do check, check, check. But things are not any better. The core problems are still the same. All you have is a different kind of icing on the cake. And what's underneath has not changed. You still don't know what you're doing. You still don't have any idea why are you here? Why do you come to work every day? And your whole organization is still running that way. We're just going through the motions. Check, check, check. This is the latest. Tomorrow it will be something else. Check, check, check. No science, no proof. We just heard that this sounds like a good idea. Let's bring in a consultant and then we'll go through the motions. That's our history.
All right. So what I'm understanding is those foundations are necessary to start here, basically, right?
Absolutely. And that's the hard part. And we typically, either at individual level or at the organizational level, that is too painful. And that would mean a really serious, close examination of what are we all about? What is our life all about? What is our organizational purpose? Why are we here? Those are hard questions. We typically want to avoid that. We'd rather just bring in a consultant, have a new checklist, check, 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 and then let's get on with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and often when you ask this question on the organizational level, then you're going to hear like, we're here to earn more money or to get more value to stakeholders. So basically, that's not the foundation for the Agile adoption.
Yep, that is exactly right. And that's also true at the personal level. For you, for your family. I think that's why the pandemic is so hard, because now we are in a room, typically on a Zoom meeting with somebody. Our children are in our home. We're really face to face with a lot of problems that we had avoided or we typically avoided in the past. We face those every day now. And those are difficult. And we're tending to blame the pandemic and say, oh, I hope we get back to normal. And what we mean by that is, I don't want to think about all these hard problems. I don't want to have to deal with what my children are learning. I don't want to have to see my spouse all day, every day. I want to go to the office, check, check, check.
All right. Yeah, it is. So if it is hard, then let's conclude with one more question is, when I decide that I want to address those topics, how I do it. So what is the first step? Or if there's I'm not going to say checklist for that, but it's where do I start? Except for buying your book, where do I start?
I think you have to have some kind of process or method where you allow yourself to think. For me, what the pandemic brought was a chance to go outside every day and walk on the trails. We have miles and miles of walking trails in my community, and I had never been on them. I always go to the gym. It's easier. I love exercise. I'm a believer in exercise. But for me, that meant going to the gym, working out on the machines, lifting weights. I did it every day when I was not traveling. But now I can't go to the gym. Where do I go? So my husband and I have been walking on the walking trails. And that changes everything. because now you're outside. Now you're in nature, especially around trees. I began to read the research on trees and how they change how you think. And now I walk side by side with my husband. We talk about things that we really hadn't before the pandemic. We walk almost 5 miles a day. And now I think I have learned a lot about myself, about my purpose, about my community, about the world. So we need to find a space, some way of doing that.
So the bottom line for me in this case will be that most cases is most organization, we don't have time for that. We're too busy coding that we don't have a time to think if we should.
Tom DeMarco wrote a classic book decades ago. Well, Tom DeMarco has written lots of classic books, but he wrote one called Slack. And in that book, he says something very profound that we have forgotten, that if in an organization you don't have any slack, any free time, any space, then you don't have time to learn, you don't have time to grow, you don't have time for the kind of reflection that we're talking about that would ensure that you don't forget your purpose, your values, why you are here. Because now organizations are so busy and they don't want to allow anybody any slack. Does that translate? That's an English word. It means space. You have to be able to breathe. You have to have a little time just to let your mind wander and let you reflect on what the world is like, what your organization is like. Why are you here? If we don't have time for that, if we don't allow it, let it happen, then yeah, we are in danger of losing so much.
Yeah, so basically slow down to go fast somewhere in the future.
Exactly. And you can't, if you don't have any space, you can't learn. Because that means little experiments, getting better. And if there isn't any room for that, if we don't have time for that, then it won't happen.
Okay, and I believe this is something we should wish to everybody listening to this podcast. All right, thank you for this conversation. That was interesting direction we went into, so I'm super happy we go there. To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.